Welcome to the second webinar for Safe Work Month 2022. Today's presentation is on incident reporting. The purpose of this webinar is to provide information and answers to commonly asked questions regarding incident reporting requirements under the new WHS legislation. We will also share the new incident triage function in DMIRS and how the triage team are working to ensure a more effective and consistent process for prioritising and managing incoming reports. This will be presented by Andrew Stanbury, Team Manager, WorkSafe Triage Notifications. Andrew will be joined by Stephen Best, Team Manager, Resource Industry Triage Notifications, and Kathy Manios, Senior Inspector, WorkSafe Investigations. The Department of Mines, Industry Regulation and Safety acknowledges Aboriginal people as the traditional custodians of the lands on which we deliver our services. We pay our respects to elders and leaders, past, present and emerging. This webinar is one of 3 in our series of Safe Work Month webinars. All webinars will be recorded and will be placed on the Safe Work Month website in the upcoming days. Just a reminder before we get started to go to slido.com to ask your questions. The event code for today is #SWM2. We encourage you to ask your questions. And now I'll hand over to Andrew to get the presentation underway.
So good afternoon, my name's Andrew Stanbury. I'm the manager of the WorkSafe Triage team. Before we get into the question and answer part of the webinar, what I'd like to do is to run through a brief presentation that'll give you an idea of who the triage team are. So the triage team was set up in response to the new legislation that's come out, and we have a standard set of processes and tools which we use to manage matters that come in. So first of all, when we established the triage team, we set some objectives. The first of those, and the most important, is to ensure that all fatalities, serious injuries, diseases and dangerous incidents as defined in the Act, which are reported to us, undergo an initial triage and then are disseminated to the appropriate industry teams for further investigation or for processing using consistent processes and tools. Secondly, it was to ensure that the incident scenes are held or secured where required using a consistent approach. Thirdly, the reason one of our objectives is to collaborate with the rest of WorkSafe across the safety regulation group to provide value to what they do and to enable them to focus their resources on their core business. So who are we? The triage team comprises a group of experienced inspectors who collate, assess and conduct initial report management of incidents that are reported to WorkSafe from all industry sectors, and we use a standard set of tools and work processes for consistency. So the team is made up of inspectors from across industry sectors, so from mining, general industry, from petrochemical and others. And the common thing is that they all have a high level of current legislative knowledge. We work 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So the legislation that drives industry to report things to WorkSafe has changed significantly, and the parts that drive industry or compel industry to report things to us are, first of all, the WorkSafe, the Work Health and Safety Act, and there are several sections there that describe what needs to be reported, when it needs to be reported. It talks about the duty to notify notifiable incidents, and also what's required in regard to preserving incident sites. Subsidiary regulation, the Mines Regulations 2022, which has recently been released, and the WHS Petroleum and Geothermal Operations Regulations 2022. And there again, both of those sets of regulations describe the requirements, and in particular describe particular incidents that are peculiar to those industries. So industries' reporting requirements are, first of all, notifiable incidents, which are described under Section 38 of the WHS Act, must be reported by telephone immediately and in writing if required by the regulator. So that's regardless of what industry sector you're working in. Any incident scene must also be preserved under Section 39 until released by an inspector. Incidents that happen and are reported under Regulation 5 of the Mines Regulations must be notified to the regulator as soon as possible in writing, and that's through the safety regulation system that the mines use. The petroleum and geothermal facility operators must, under Divisions 1 to 5, immediately notify the regulator by the fastest means, which can be telephone or writing, whichever is the quickest. So there's some very specific requirements there which industry needs to be aware of. So we've been going since the legislation came into force in April, and some of the issues that we have discovered through this learning process is, first of all, in a lot of cases there's a lack of understanding of what constitutes the seriousness of an incident. And there again, in the legislation, it's very well described, so it's important to read that and understand what a serious incident is. Also, the relate reporting of incidents, as we talked about before, there's some requirements there as to when things need to be reported, so complying with that is important. The other thing that we're noticing is a lack of knowledge of what to report or under what part of the legislation things need to be reported. And finally, the other key thing that's coming out is the reliance on other PCBs to report. For instance, if you have a worksite with say a principal and quite a few contractors, quite often it's unclear to the contractors on site whether they need to be reporting if they think the principal is reporting, or vice versa. At the end of the day, if there are any issues at all that industry or PCBUs are unsure of, we're more than willing to help and help you understand that. We're only a phone call away. So let's go to the question and answer part of the webinar and just understand exactly what your questions are out there.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Andrew, for the presentation there. I'll also introduce Kathy Manius on the far right, obviously Andrew in the middle, and I'm Stephen Best. So get your questions coming through. We'll try and answer as many as we can. We'll try and answer them to the best of our ability, but there may be some topics that we don't quite know everything as yet, because obviously the legislation is still quite new. There's still some nuances that we're working through with the regulator. So we've got a good half dozen questions in. So I'm going to open the floor by asking Kathy. So somebody's asking, what is a serious injury?
A serious injury is in Section 36 of our WHS Act 2020. Under that, it outlines what's prescribed as a serious injury or illness as well. So there could be, for example, lacerations that are deep lacerations, amputations. There is also exposure to substances, anything that requires a person to have immediate treatment in a hospital as an inpatient, or immediate treatment at all, basically any immediate treatment.
Okay, thank you. There's a follow-on question with this. So in that scenario, is a ligament tear considered a notifiable injury, as the process between surgery and recovery is going to be over 10 days?
Yes, so that will be notifiable, and it will have, because it is in the opinion of a medical practitioner, 10 days or more.
Yeah.
Then that will be notifiable as a serious injury.
And absolutely, because it's a ligament tear, that would meet the definition of a serious injury.
Well, the ligament tear is not actually listed in there. It would be the 10 days that would make it reportable.
Right, lovely, okay. I'll throw one to Andrew now. So are schools required to notify WorkSafe of serious injury or illness to their students?
Basically, the school being a workplace, anyone that gets a serious injury or illness at the workplace, that's a notifiable event, essentially.
Okay. And then let's look at something we call restricted duties. So I'll open this to both of you. Is undertaking restricted duties? Sorry, I've just lost my question.
Oh, it's like a xylophone.
No, it's gone down the bottom. All right, no worries. Okay, let's deal with this one. What are the definitions of reportable injuries when they are mental rather than physical? And how does a workplace report on something? I'm not quite sure what the second part of this means. I'm not quite sure how do they report on something that is already known. So let's take the first bit of it. What are the definitions of reportable injuries when they're mental rather than physical?
Well, in the Act, it says safety and health. Health covers mental as well as physical.
Yeah. Okay.
So anything that, if it's in that definition, will be notifiable. Obviously, sometimes it does take the 10 days.
Yep.
And then it becomes notifiable.
Yeah. So the mental health aspect of it is actually not. It's not treated any differently to a physical injury. It's
and if they are having immediate treatment as well, then it is.
Basically, the consequence of the injury, whether it be a psychosocial injury or a physical injury, it's more the consequence, how much time, what sort of treatment, whether it's immediate treatment.
Yep.
You know, if somebody has a very serious episode on site that's related to a psychosocial injury, that's treated exactly the same by us and by the legislation as a physical injury.
Okay. Is there a public register of active investigations and their results? So I'm aware that the department does publish whenever there's a prosecution that has completed. I'm not 100% sure that we actually list active investigations or active prosecutions, but I'll refer to yourselves.
Not that I'm aware of, but we can take that question on notice.
Yeah, we can go back. Okay. Got another one here in relation to LTI and the 10 working days. Can we confirm if the LTI reporting requirement is 10 working days or 10 calendar days?
It's 10 days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to flick open my good book here. And it says normal work for at least 10 days after the day on which the injury or illness occurs.
So if somebody's working, for instance, on a mine site and they work shifts and they work during the weekends, then that's part of the 10 days, essentially. Yep. So it's the next 10 days they would normally work.
Okay. So if an injury is not at first thought to take 10 days, which they can do, and it takes longer, does this then need to be reported?
So we get a lot of reports that are 10 plus days old because what's happened, there's been an injury and it might seem a minor injury and doesn't fall under any other reporting requirements, but all of a sudden that person has had 10 days where they haven't been able to do their normal duties, and they've been put off by a medical practitioner, and then it becomes reportable then.
Yeah, okay. I'll give this one to Kathy then. So does 10 days of restricted duties count from the day of the incident or the day of the first medical certificate?
Well, It's when they stop. Would be when they stop the work for the injury. It's after the medical practitioner has actually said,
Yes.
in my opinion, I will give you restrictive duties for 10 days.
Yeah.
That's when it starts.
But let's run the scenario where the person has an injury.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, you break your leg. Now, just because you haven't received a medical certificate,
Mm-hmm.
should that stop the PCBU from reporting it as a notifiable? Because it stands to reason that if you've broken your leg, you're highly unlikely to be back at work in that time frame. So should the PCBU simply delay reporting until they receive that medical certificate?
No.
I would be really surprised if you broke your leg and didn't get seen by a doctor for 10 days. Essentially, so
yeah,
or have surgery.
Yeah, so I mean, and also with an injury like that, you'd have to look at the incidents. Obviously, an incident that caused a broken bone, there might be some serious aspect to that. But a serious injury, if the person hasn't seen a medical practitioner, well, there's an issue there for starters.
Yeah, okay. But I guess what we're touching on there is we don't want them PCBUs simply delaying reporting if they can make a very safe assumption that the person will not be back to work for that 10-day period.
Right.
But at the end of the day, the broken leg scenario, they've actually received a fracture. So it meets the definition of serious injury anyway, regardless of whether it's 10 days or not. So, yeah. All right, we'll take the next one. So how soon after a notification will the reporter be notified if the scene does or does not need to be preserved? So we're touching on scene preservation. So I'll throw that one to Kathy then. So how soon after a notification? So somebody notifies us, rings us up.
Yeah.
When will they be notified if the scene does or does not need to be preserved?
As soon as they call, we'll tell them that it needs to be preserved if it's one of the serious and notifiable.
Okay.
They're told straight away.
Yeah. So I think Andrew touched on that earlier on in the presentation. We offer a 24/7 service. So essentially you can ring at any time of the day or the evening, and you'll get put through to a qualified inspector, an appointed inspector, who will be able to discuss the scenario with you, discuss the incident, discuss any hazards that are remaining, talk about the risks associated with that, and then also discuss the scene preservation and whether there's a scene release is appropriate or not. And pretty much we provide that service because the new legislation that came in did have that requirement to preserve the scene. I don't know whether Andrew wants to add to that.
There's a whole lot of reasons why a scene would be preserved, as Steve touched on and Kathy touched on. Are people going to be exposed to hazards? For instance, if something's collapsed, do we need to keep people away from that for quite a while until it's made safe? It could also be for investigative purposes. If we don't want a scene disturbed. There are also reasons why a scene can be disturbed, for instance, to make it safe if people are imminently exposed. And also if you need to remove an injured or deceased person from the area. Those are all reasons why a scene can be disturbed anyway. But as a blanket rule, if something is reportable under the Act, it's not under regulations, under the Act, the scene must be preserved until it's released by an inspector.
Okay. And just then following on from that, we've got a question in relation to scene preservation. Would you need to also contact the police?
Contact the police.
Yeah, I guess the scenario I can think of is if you've had a death. So the police may need to be notified in relation to that. There may be scenarios where there's been a situation that has affected the public that is of interest to the police side. So
look, they work under different legislation to us. Legislation that drives us and industry to preserve scenes is the WHS Act. The police, for whatever reason, might want the scene left undisturbed too, and they'll communicate that to, you know, the parties at the scene, sort of thing.
Okay. All right. Okay, we'll change tack slightly here. We've got a question in, what role does the HSR play in the investigation process? So this is slightly going off topic with what we are looking at here. We're looking at incident notification rather than investigation, but I'll throw it open to Kathy or Andrea if you want to just talk to that at all.
If the HSR is there at the time, then they may want to assist the PCBU if the PCBU wants them to assist, or if they want to make the scene safe and make sure that it's preserved. But they would have to consult that with the PCBU. There is nothing that says the PCBU must have them involved in a serious investigation.
It's part of the HSR's role, I guess, to be involved in those sort of things. And from a PCBU perspective too, the HSRs that you have on site are very, very valuable to the organisation. They're very grounded, they're very connected to what's happening out there. So the PCBU, in getting an HSR involved in an investigation, you're probably going to get a better quality output, if you like. Because of that, they do add an awful lot of value to all of the safety processes on any site.
Yeah. Okay, here's an interesting one. We might have to refer to the good book for this. Are there any fines for not reporting serious incidents?
Yes, there are.
Yeah.
There is penalties. It's $12,500 if you do not notify, and it's $55,000 for a body corporate.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Good memory test there for us. Okay, so next one we've got is, let's go back to the school scenario. Why are students classed as workers for notifiable incidents? I'm not sure that we've actually said that students are classified as workers.
No.
I don't think that's what we alluded to. I think what we were alluding to there is the school that is operating is the PCBU, and the students are under their care.
Yep.
It's somebody's workplace.
It's a workplace, and the PCBU, you've got to look at their sphere of influence. Wherever their sphere of influence is, if people are injured or exposed to hazards, then that entity is responsible and needs to manage those. And it doesn't matter who the person is, whether they be a worker or somebody just coming onto a site.
Okay. Kathy, I might put this one to you so it stays on the same vein of schools. This one's about an early childhood service. So at their workplace, they're an early childhood service. We report to ECRU, child-related, and they report to the insurer, any injuries and incidents to employees. Do we still need to report to WorkSafe?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Definitely. Most definitely need to report to WorkSafe. It's a workplace.
I'm just going to explore that one a little bit further and go to Andrew with this one. One we see commonly is electrical incidents, where we have an electric event, someone gets a tingle or they get an electrocution. There's also multiple reporting requirements there, and I'll let Andrew touch on that one.
So the one that we are concerned about is obviously reporting. It's a reportable, a notifiable incident to us. So it should be, we should know about it immediately. There are, as Steve alluded to, other requirements. So reporting it to energy safety, and depending on where you are in the state, who it gets reported to. And their reporting requirements, in other words, what type of electric shock it is, might vary. However, from our perspective, and in the current legislation, all electric shocks must be reported without exception.
Yeah. We have another question that sort of sits loosely around this. So we've got an environmental incident. How bad, quite an interesting question, how bad does the spill need to be before it becomes a notifiable incident? So we've got a spillage of diesel, and the person's asking how much needs to have been spilt before it becomes a serious incident. So I guess what we're looking at here is we deal in WorkSafe, so we talk about the worker's environment, but there's also PAGEO regulations, and there's also dangerous goods legislation. So dangerous goods sits under a different act and a different regulation. However, the workplace sits under the WHS Act. So it's I'm gonna suggest you need to refer to the applicable regulation in relation to amount of spillage of diesel, but
broadly ours is any uncontrolled spillage.
Yeah.
So if it's going to be a hazard, essentially, which is what we're concerned about is management of hazards. So if there's a release and it's uncontrolled, and as Kathy said, then it's reportable.
Okay. This is a burning question. How often is it likely that an inspector will visit a site to investigate a notifiable incident?
There's no, there is absolutely no rule, or it depends on the incident. It depends on where it is. I mean, we have things happen in very remote areas, so that site might get a visit, but it might take a long time to get inspectors there. Depends on the availability of our resources, all of those sorts of things. And sometimes inspectors, it requires a specialist inspector.
That's right.
For instance, one with
hygiene.
Yeah, certain subject matter expertise that needs to go to.
That's right.
And so the availability of them. And we do have a very broad resource base, but at the same time, sadly, there is a lot happening out there these days.
I'll throw this one to Kathy. So what is the outcome if an incident was not reported due to genuine ignorance? I'm not quite sure where they're going with genuine ignorance of legislation. Every PCBU should be aware of what the legislation is that they operate under, but let's go with this. So what is the outcome of an incident was not reported due to genuine ignorance of what is considered a notifiable incident? And I think this refers back to the potential fines.
Yes, that's right. It does go back to potential fines. And there's also the non-disturbance, if that's issued and that's not maintained, then there's a fine penalty for that as well.
Can I just jump in here too? We've got brand new legislation, brand new regulations across the board. So there's a lot of new rules for industry to learn and for us to come to terms with as well. The most productive way that we can answer the sorts of questions like that is by engagement. So organisations that are out there that aren't sure about what they should report, even if they've read the legislation and don't quite understand it, is ring us and ask us. Not the triage team, but we've got a bunch of inspectors in all the other disciplines, and if people ring them, if PCBUs ring them, engage with them, and get their guidance on what needs to be reported and all the conditions around those. There is a transition period, as I said, for the new legislation, and we need to work together to get it embedded sooner rather than later, I guess.
Okay, thanks for that. I'll go to Kathy again with this one. Does WorkSafe require notification of injury, illness, or person in a care facility? Now, I'm not quite sure that's all they've given on the question, because there's a lot of nuances with that. I think they've said e.g. aged care participant. Not quite sure what they're meaning by participant.
The
resident.
I'd say it would be the resident.
Okay, so let's go with resident. Does WorkSafe require notification of injury, illness, or person in a care facility to a resident?
I don't want to say no, but it probably is best to notify us because it is somebody's workplace, and if a death has happened in that workplace, then we may need to rule out all factors in the environment
Yep.
For the workers as well.
Okay, thanks for that. If a person is injured on day one, they continue to work, but they go to the doctor 2 weeks later, and then are given restricted duties from that point on, is this notifiable?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And there again, we do get quite a few notifications where something's occurred and it wasn't thought to be serious at the time. Sometimes even maybe the injured party hasn't reported it because they didn't think it was all that bad, and then it's got worse and worse and worse, and it's been exacerbated by their work, the things they're doing. And then they end up at a doctor with a longer recovery time. So very important when things happen on sites, and it's in the interest of all the parties, that they're addressed immediately. If people are injured, they need to be seen to straight away.
Okay, so let's explore that a little bit further then. Someone's asking, do part loss days, and I'm not quite sure what they mean by part loss days, because the Act is very clear. If you are unable to perform your normal duties, then it's a lost time. So what they're asking is, do part loss days count towards total number of days lost or only full days?
I think that's reduced restrictive duties. Sometimes they reduce their hours so they can heal.
Yeah.
Even if a person can't do their normal duties for half a day, that means for that day they couldn't do their normal duties.
Yes.
Therefore, that's a day.
Yeah, doesn't matter whether it's 4 hours, 3 hours, or 7.5 hours.
No.
It's not like it's an accumulative total.
It's still a day they couldn't do their normal duties.
Yeah.
And bear in mind that's got to be in the opinion of a medical practitioner.
Yeah. Okay, don't forget to keep your questions coming through. There's no such thing as a stupid question. I'm sure there's other people out there that are thinking exactly the same thing or curious about, what is reportable. Also, scene preservation, if you need clarity on what exactly scene preservation looks like. Don't forget it's SWM2, and get your question in. Okay, so let's pick the next one. We're going to touch on mining now. So obviously mining has their own specific set of regulations, but they still fall under the same Act. I'll throw this to Andrew then. If an incident occurs on a mine, who's responsible for reporting the incident? The PCBU or the mine operator? I'm not quite sure whether the person asking the question understands the definition of a PCBU, because technically the mine operator is the PCBU as well. So I'll let Andrew talk to that one.
Look, this sort of leads into another question where this legislation has changed who reports. So the PCBU needs to report the incident, but most mines in fact, have many PCBUs. So if you have a mine with a few layers of contractors, all of those contractors have and this is not just on a mine site, it's any work site. All of those PCBUs have a duty. So just because somebody else has fulfilled their duty doesn't diminish your duty. You still have to report, basically.
Okay. And I guess a question following on from that is, someone's asking, would we be duplicating a notifiable and reportable for a mining injury? I guess that depends on which we've been notified of first. They're asking, are we duplicating? I guess you would be if you notify us of both.
Sorry, I don't follow the question.
They're simply asking, would we be duplicating a notifiable and reportable for a mining injury? So I think what they're exploring is the fact that you've got a reportable injury under the regs, but you've also got a notifiable serious injury under the Act. Okay. And it's a conversation we have on a regular basis where something starts off as a reportable injury under the mines regs.
Yep. Okay.
But then the person's illness or injury extends.
So, if somebody reports something under Regulation 5 of the mines regulations, and they report that, and it's a valid report under that regulation, and to create a scenario, for instance, that person may die later on, and therefore that then becomes something that's notifiable. Obviously, the change in status of the circumstances, the injured person or whatever, needs to be notified then immediately, so that the department is aware of any changes. The department already knows about it and has a record of it, and probably by that stage is investigating or processing it or whatever. So there's nothing new to report unless it changes in nature or the circumstances, or, as I said, if the IP might sadly go downhill or become much sicker, or in some cases not survive.
Yep. Okay, we'll explore that a little bit further. I've got a couple of questions lined up on that. Got about 20 minutes left on the webinar, so make sure you get your questions in, SWM2, get them into us. So just exploring that a little bit further, mining related incident. Can I use reportable incident R for injuries that have a medical treatment?
Can you report, sorry, can you report under Regulation 5 for things that have medical treatment?
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. However, the caveat with that is you need to make sure that that incident and that injury and that treatment doesn't fall into the serious injury illness.
Yeah.
Before you automatically select R5.
So, and you touched on the issue there. It's if you're reporting through SRS for a mines related incident, illness or injury, you actually have to select what you're reporting it under, as opposed to a phone call where usually the PCBU, whether they be on mines or general industry, are just reporting something that's happened. And at the end of the day, we tend to make that judgment when we get the call through, because sometimes the people don't know.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to backtrack. We had a mic drop out slightly, so I'm going to throw this back to Kathy. I'm just repeating a question that was asked earlier, but the response dropped, the mic dropped out. Yeah. Does WorkSafe require notification of injury, illness, or person in a care facility, e.g. an aged care participant?
Okay.
So we're back.
Well, we said we're not going to say don't report it, because there may be other environmental factors involved, and it is somebody's workplace. So it would be best to report it.
Okay. This is an interesting question. All right, let's touch on this one. So someone's asking, what are the triage levels and how are they determined? We are seeing reference to the triage level in SRS, but unclear. I'm not quite sure where they're seeing reference to the triage level, but I'll just touch on that one slightly and open it up to Andrew and Kathy. The regulator was very clear when the Act came out. There's a statement of intent, and in that statement of intent, he talks about the volume of incidents that come in, and we're predicting that we're going to receive around about 10,000 this year. He's made it clear that we are unable, as a regulator, to visit every single site where there's been an injury or an incident, and that we have set up a model internally where we will triage and we will escalate the most significant and serious incidents through to the particular team. So if I go back to this question, what are the triage levels? I don't think it's important what the triage levels is. That's something that we have set internally.
Yeah, look, we do have levels that are set. They for our, as you said, they for our benefit internally. They are complex because each level has a whole lot of criteria for it. So we won't go into that detail here. But what what it is, it's because of that commitment that we've said that we have finite resources, so we will use those resources in industry where they needed most. We will attend things that need our attention immediately, and escalating back from or de-escalating back from that. So we need to have, like, a lot of organisations. For instance, I was down at the RFDS, who do an amazing job in the state recently, and they have a system too where things are triaged according to where the resources are needed most urgently. So we have a similar sort of system internally.
I'll go, I'm going to go back to, we talked on this briefly earlier. So this is around electric shock. Don't know whether you want to take this one, Kathy. Oh, where's it gone? Come back. Sorry, I've lost that question. It's disappeared. Oh, there we go. Sorry, it's back again. Let me just move it up to the top. Okay, regarding electric shock incidents, do you require a separate report to energy safety, or do energy safety share this information with WorkSafe?
What we do want immediately is that someone has also notified Western Power or the power source. Could be Horizon Power for regional areas, depends. We do, I think Western Power also notifies energy safety as well. So yeah, we do have links and we do talk to each other if we believe it's something serious. So yeah, it just depends on if it's a zap, a tingle, but we do notify.
We were actually at the moment looking at that process at the moment, being as it's a double handling of information sort of thing. And a lot of people don't realise, they think that if they report it to one authority, they don't have to report it to the other. So we're looking at an internal process there. What we do is if people report an electric shock to us, we do ask them, have you reported this to the other agency that they need to report to.
Okay, we've got a question come in now around restricted duties. Someone has an IP who has restricted duties for 3 days. They sprained their ankle working on the job. Why doesn't this fall into the definition of a serious injury?
Well, it depends on how it happened, but if it's 3 days, then no, it's not reportable.
Yeah. So the point here being, if it extends,
if it's not over 10 days,
yeah,
then it's not reportable.
Okay.
But yeah, having said, as Kathy said, it depends on the circumstances. If they sprain their ankle running away from a major fall of ground, then yes, that's definitely reportable.
If something fell from height and hit their ankle or something like that, that would be reportable under notifiable.
Yeah, so it needs to be looked at in context.
Somebody's asking for a little bit of clarification, and we might refer back to the good book here. Can you clarify the 10 days is unable to work, isn't it? Rather than not restricted duties?
Both.
Yep.
Yeah,
it's both.
Yeah, if they can't do their normal duties
for 10 days or more,
so that could be,
it's reportable. If it's 10 days off work, it's reportable too.
Yeah. So if we literally quote from the Act that in the opinion of a medical practitioner is likely to prevent the person from being able to do the person's normal work for at least 10 days after the day on which the injury or illness occurs. So it doesn't even mention restricted duties, it just says normal work in relation to the 10 days. So I think that satisfies that question. This one might sit slightly outside of our remit. What defines a reportable incident for an environmental incident? So I'm not quite sure
check with EPA.
Where, what sector the question is coming from, because at the end of the day, if it falls under your PAGEO regs or it falls under the environmental or dangerous goods, so I would say refer to your legislation, your Act and your regs as to what defines a reportable incident. I think the Act is very clear on what is notifiable, and then the mining regs talks about what is reportable. So it's very important that people understand the difference between what is a notifiable occurrence or notifiable incident and a serious injury, and then what sits under the mining regs, which is a reportable event.
There can be overlaps too. If one of the questions earlier that you read, Steve, about a release of a substance, which could mean an environmental incident, but also it's a hazard for people. So that's reportable in a couple of different senses, or notifiable in a couple of different senses, should I say?
Yeah, lovely question here. I assume there aren't any penalties for over-reporting? I guess with that one, look, we are a 24/7 service. You know, at 2 o'clock in the morning, if you feel the need to report something to us, you know, it's, all right.
Can I just, there was a question, and I'm surprised there haven't been more questions around preservation of sites or preservation of accident scenes, because it's a question that we get asked quite a bit when people engage with us from industry as to what they should preserve. And the advice that we give is that generally to err on the side of caution. I mean, an example that we were talking about the other day, Kathy, was where there was a significant dropped object that came off the top of a construction site, did some damage on the way down, and then hit the ground. So it was really a hazard all the way down to the ground. So that site would be the top of the building, anything that it's damaged on the way down, any other levels, and the area down below, sort of thing.
Right.
So
anything in the vicinity of the area of the scene. Absolutely.
And so anywhere that could be implicated in the incident, and there again, I go back to what I said before. If you're unsure, ring us and ask us immediately, and we'll be able to help you with that.
And what about equipment? So you talked about the different levels in the building. You've talked about the object that fell. What about the equipment around that then?
There again, advice from the inspector is the best way, but essentially if you're unsure, then it's part of the, and there may be pieces of equipment that weren't directly involved, but indirectly could be involved in the incident. You know, for instance, if you had an electric shock over here and the substation that feeds that is a kilometre away, that substation is part of the scene as well too.
Yeah. I just want to explore that a little bit more. So what about isolation of equipment? So if you have an incident scene where somebody has received an electric shock,
we would expect that to be isolated straight away.
Okay.
Anything that will make the scene safe and not leave it hazardous, that's fine. That needs to be done. If a deceased person in a fatality scene needs to be removed, then that needs to be still done too.
Yeah.
So it's preserving the area of the scene.
So I think
and the items involved are like plant. If there's plants, more than one plant that's connected, then all of those plant items should be preserved as well.
So I think the key thing there is you're permitted to make the area safe so that no one else can be exposed to the hazards, but there's still the requirement to preserve the incident scene. So by all means, you can isolate pieces of equipment, but you can't remove them from that area and park them up in the garage or in the warehouse. Okay. All right, we've got just under 10 minutes to go, so don't forget SWM2, get your questions in. We've still got a list of questions here, so we'll try and get through as many as we can. Will Demers be releasing the incident notification guide? Is there going to be any further material that's going to come out that's going to assist PCBUs?
Yes, at the moment there is, I believe there's a flow chart, a simple flow chart, which is quite self-explanatory, that's been released, and there's also another document that's under review at the moment, which will be released in the not too distant future, which will have more detail in there.
Yeah, okay. Interesting question here. I guess either of you can take this one. So when does a fall from height become a notifiable incident?
Is it an object or a person?
Not quite sure here, but
yeah.
I think the Act is very clear.
Yeah, very clear. It says anything, anything or any plant.
I think it talks about three things: thing, object, or a fall or release from height of any plant, substance, or thing. So I'm not quite sure what the question is teasing there, but it's very clear in the Act that if you have a fall from height, it's notifiable. All right, let's have a look at this. So who is responsible to notify a reportable incident? And I think we've touched on this already. Is it the employer of the person injured or the main contractor or both? And I guess this question needs to be clarified in the sense of, are we talking about a reportable incident or are we talking about a notifiable? So I'm gonna go with what's here. Let's talk about reportable.
In general, WorkSafe, then there's a partial responsibility. Whether you're the PCBU or as a main contractor or you're the subcontractor's boss, you have the partial responsibility to notify WorkSafe.
It's actually a shared responsibility, but as I said before, because you may have two parties involved or more, that doesn't diminish any one of those parties' duty. They still have the same duty to report.
The new legislation does state if you have an agreement with the main contractor, then, and that decision has been made that the main contractor reports or the main contractor has left it up to each subcontractor to report, then we would need to see that agreement, evidence of that agreement.
Yeah, okay. A bit of a topical one at the minute. So is COVID-19 infections reportable?
No.
Not anymore?
No.
No.
If, let me qualify that, generally no. If there was something unusual about it, perhaps in a sense where more people were put in danger, but it would have to be quite an exceptional instance.
There would
generally
have to be, again, evidence of if the person has passed away from COVID or if they've gone for medical treatment or been hospitalised, then that would need to be, that could be looked at if it goes to that escalation.
Yeah.
There was a letter issued, I know, to mining. I'm not sure if it went to general industry. I know it was issued to mining some time ago that very explicitly described the circumstances where it might be reportable.
I'm going to backtrack to my previous question around fall from height. We've had another one in. So they're asking for further clarification. Is there specified height for notifiable incident, e.g. a fall from 2 meters or 3 meters?
No specified height. No specified height. And if a person falls off a ladder, that's something falling still.
Yeah. I think it's very clear in the Act. There's no ambiguity in there. If it's a fall from height, it's a fall from height. Doesn't matter whether it's 2 meters or 3.
Just think of it as a different level, regardless of what that level is.
One level to another.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's tackle this one. This we do have conversations with PCBUs that ring into us, and it is an area of discussion. So, what does the term serious mean when we look at burns, eye injuries, or lacerations? So lacerations are pretty straightforward. Lacerations are when it's gone deep into the muscle tissue or the skin. But what do we mean by serious when we're looking at burns or eye injuries?
I guess one of the indicators, sorry, Kat.
Eyes would be loss of sight, blurriness. But it depends.
Another good indicator is what treatment does that person need as a result of the injury.
Yeah.
If they need to be raced off to hospital and those sorts of things, then it's serious. And also the long-term prognosis, as Kathy said, if someone's lost their eyesight, then that's a serious thing.
Yeah.
I think only a medical practitioner could really tell us.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I wanted to touch on with that, because one thing we do comment back to people that are contacting us or reporting things in, it's probably not the best idea for the PCBU to be making an evaluation of the seriousness of an eye injury unless they're a qualified medical practitioner and they can actually make an accurate diagnosis at that point in time. So if there's been impact to the eye or there has been an injury to the eye, unless you're a medical practitioner and you can actually diagnose that, I would be saying err on the side of caution and be contacting us, because it's a notifiable.
Yeah.
There's also the some types of injury, and we see them too. You talked about levels of things that are reported. What the seriousness of the injury at the time of the incident may not reflect the actual seriousness of the injury. And a good example of that might be head injuries, where somebody might bump their head and say, I feel fine, I've just got a bump on the head, and then start to really go downhill over a period of time. We've seen that numerous times. Things like exposures to substances, where the the reaction might not be immediate but might kick in later. Thermal stress and all of those sorts of injuries. So it's important that from the person who's got control of this person, of the IP, or their well-being, very important to err on the side of caution, and make sure that, even if you do go overboard a little bit in regard to their treatment, the reporting of it and all of those sort of things, it's much easier to de-escalate something, particularly in the treatment of someone, than it is to escalate it, because then it might be too late.
Okay. Well, thanks for that. I'm just aware we've probably got about a minute left. We'd just like to remind you we've got another webinar coming up next week for Safe Work Month. Jump onto the Demers website, get yourself registered, and there'll also be a Q&A session with that one. I guess before we close off, I'd like to thank everybody that sent their questions in. Really sorry if we haven't managed to get to your question in particular, but don't forget this webinar is actually recorded. It's going to be up on the Demers website soon. And at this stage, I'd like to thank Kathy and Andrew for coming along. And do you want to, we'll squeeze one last question in. Can an injured worker report a notifiable incident?
Yes.
There we go. Okay. So anybody can contact us, report your incidents. And as I said, we're available 24/7, 365 days a year. And that's it.
I think too, what I said in the beginning too, we're going through this this process of introducing new legislation. It's a learning curve for everyone involved, all the stakeholders.
Yeah.
The more we engage, the more productive that process will be.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, I think that's up on time. We're now at 1 o'clock. Again, thank you very much to Kathy. Thanks to Andrew and Stephen. And yeah, we look forward to not hearing from you.